To really get a handle on where India's economy is heading, you've really got to look at what its industries are actually producing.
Exactly.
And that's what we're diving into today, the very latest industrial output figures. We want to understand what's powering growth and maybe, where things are cooling off a bit.
That's right. We're zeroing in on the quick estimate of the Index of Industrial Production, the IIP, for February 2025.
From the Government of India's Press Information Bureau.
Yep. And you can think of the IIP as like a monthly barometer for the health of India's factories, mines, power plants, that sort of thing.
And this is fresh data, relatively speaking, but it's worth keeping in mind. It comes with about a 6-week lag.
Right, about that, yes. It's based on numbers coming directly from the ground, the factories themselves.
But it's an initial estimate.
Exactly, a quick estimate. So it can definitely be revised as more complete information comes in later.
Got it. So our goal today for listening is really to make sense of these numbers.
Mm-hmm. We want to pull out the key insights, see which parts of the industrial engine are revving up.
And which might be idling.
Yeah, and what this could signal about the bigger economic picture.
Yeah.
We'll try to guide you through the data without getting lost in a maze of figures.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. The top line number. The IIP showed a 2.9% growth in February 2025.
Right, 2.9%.
Now, on its own, that sounds like, a positive direction. But we need context, don't we?
Absolutely, you really do. If we look back just 1 month to January 2025,
okay,
the IIP had actually recorded a stronger growth of 5.0%.
So a bit of a slowdown then from January to February.
Exactly. That's what's interesting here. We're seeing a deceleration in the pace of growth.
Any initial thoughts on why that might be? Any big events or shifts in February?
Well, that's always the question, isn't it? It could be various factors, maybe base effects, maybe specific sector issues. It's something to keep an eye on as more data comes out.
Fair enough. And just to give folks a concrete number, the IIP index value itself in Feb 25 was 151.3.
Compared to 147.1 back in February 2024.
So still growing year on year, even with that slight month-on-month dip in the growth rate.
Precisely. Still positive territory compared to last year. And to really understand where this growth and, the deceleration is coming from, we need to break it down.
Into the main components.
Right. The 3 major pillars of the IIP: mining, manufacturing, and electricity.
Okay, let's do that. How did each of those sectors perform? Let's start with mining.
Mining saw a relatively modest growth, 1.6% in February. Its index hit 141.9.
Okay, 1.6%. And electricity generation.
A bit more zip there, as you said earlier. 3.6% growth for electricity, index up to 194. Right.
So mining at 1.6, electricity at 3.6.
Yeah.
Which leaves the big one, manufacturing.
And is the big one. Manufacturing posted growth of 2.9% in February, index at 148.6.
So the same as the overall IIP growth.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's because, and this is crucial, manufacturing has this massive weight in the overall IIP.
How much are we talking?
It accounts for almost 78%, 77.63321 to be exact, according to the release.
Wow. Okay. So manufacturing's performance is basically the key driver here.
Absolutely. It really sets the tone for that overall 2.9% figure we started with.
That really puts things in perspective. So naturally, the next question is, within that huge manufacturing sector, were there specific areas doing the heavy lifting? Or maybe some lagging?
Yes, absolutely. When we drill down a bit further into what's called the NIC 2-digit level.
That breaks manufacturing down into different industry groups.
Exactly, 23 distinct groups. And the data shows that 14 of those 23 actually saw positive growth in February compared to last year.
14 out of 23. So more winners than losers, broadly speaking.
Broadly, yes. And there were 3 standout performers really leading the pack in terms of positive contribution.
Okay, let's hone in on those. Which parts of manufacturing were really humming?
First off, we have the manufacture of basic metals. It saw a solid growth of 5.8%.
Basic metals. So steel, things like that.
Precisely. And the report even gives examples of products driving this, like flat products of alloy steel, pipes and tubes of steel, and bars and rods of mild steel.
Right, the fundamental building blocks for lots of other industries. Construction, infrastructure.
You got it. It often signals broader activity.
Makes sense. What was the second big contributor?
Number 2 was the manufacture of motor vehicles, trailers, and semi-trailers. This one recorded really quite impressive growth of 8.9%.
Nearly 9%. That's significant. Cars, trucks.
And again, we get specific examples: auto components, spares and accessories, axle, and commercial vehicles.
Interesting. Commercial vehicles, too. That could signal business confidence, maybe?
Could be. It definitely underscores strength in the auto industry, whether it's consumer demand or business investment in fleets.
Definitely encouraging, given the auto sector's reach.
Okay.
And the third key positive contributor.
The third one was the manufacture of other non-metallic mineral products. Think cement, concrete.
Construction materials again?
Exactly. It grew by 8.0%. And the items highlighted are cement all types, cement clinkers, and prefabricated concrete blocks, including ready-mix concrete.
So very clearly linked to infrastructure and building activity.
No doubt about it. You can't build much without those things.
So putting that together, we're seeing strength in foundational stuff like metals and cement, plus a boost in a major consumer and business sector like automotive. That's quite a revealing picture.
It is. It suggests underlying momentum in some key areas. But, there's another way to slice this data.
How so?
The report also classifies industrial production based on the end use of the goods. It's called the use-based classification.
Okay, so instead of looking at who makes it, like
Yeah.
mining or manufacturing.
We look at what the goods are ultimately used for. Is it a raw material? Is it equipment for a factory? Is it something you buy in a shop?
Gotcha. So what are these use-based categories?
Well, there are primary goods. Think raw materials, stuff right out of the ground, or basic processing.
Yeah.
Then capital good machinery, equipment, things businesses buy to produce other things. This is a really key indicator for investment.
Right, investment spending.
Then intermediate goods, these get used up in the production process of making final goods. Think components, semi-finished items. Infrastructure and construction goods, pretty self-explanatory, links back to that cement and steel we mentioned.
Right.
And finally, the consumer stuff. Split into consumer durables, the bigger ticket items like washing machines, cars, electronics.
Things that last a while.
Exactly. And consumer non-durables, your everyday items, food, toiletries, things you buy frequently.
Okay, that framework makes sense. So how did these different categories perform in February? What were their index levels?
Right. For February 2025, the index for primary goods was 152.3. Capital goods hit 115.5. Intermediate goods were at 159.9.
And infrastructure construction, that seemed strong earlier.
It was a robust 191.3 for that index.
Wow, highest of the lot. And the consumer goods.
Consumer durables came in at 126.5 and consumer non-durables at 146.7.
Okay, lots of numbers there. But the real insight comes from the growth rates compared to last year.
Right, precisely. Let's look at those year-on-year growth figures for February. Primary goods grew by 2.8%.
Okay, aligns with the modest mining growth we saw.
Sort of, yeah. Now, here's a really interesting one. Capital goods. They recorded significant growth of 8.2%.
8.2%, that jumps out.
It really does. That's quite strong, and as we said, suggests a potential pickup in business investment. Firms buying more machinery, maybe expanding capacity.
Which is generally seen as a very positive sign for future economic activity.
Absolutely. It's one of the key indicators economists watch for sustained growth signals.
Okay, so capital goods looking strong. What about intermediate goods, the stuff used in production?
That was more subdued. Growth of 1.5% for intermediate goods.
All right. And infrastructure construction goods, given the cement and metals data.
As you'd expect, pretty healthy growth there, 6.6%. Really reinforces that momentum we saw in the underlying sectors.
So strong investment signals, strong infrastructure signals. What about the consumer side when we look at growth?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag there. Consumer durables saw decent growth, 3.8%.
Okay, so people are still buying some of those bigger items.
Seems so. However, consumer non-durables, they actually contracted, a fall of 2.1%.
A negative number, minus 2.1%.
Yes, that's definitely noteworthy. It might suggest some softening and immediate consumer demand for those everyday essentials.
That's interesting. Any thoughts on why? Inflation, maybe? People tightening belts on groceries and such?
It's certainly a possibility. It could be inflation pinching disposable incomes or maybe just shifting spending patterns. It's something to watch closely in the coming months.
So, bit of a divergence there. People buying washing machines, but maybe cutting back a bit on, say, packaged food or toiletries, at least in February.
That could be one interpretation, yes. And when we look at which of these use-based categories contributed the most to that overall 2.9% IIP growth.
The biggest drivers.
Infrastructure construction goods were number one, followed by primary goods, and then capital goods.
So investment in infrastructure are really carrying the load right now, according to this data.
That's what this February snapshot suggests, yes. The growth seems more driven by investment in foundational sectors than by immediate consumption, especially non-durable consumption.
Okay, that gives us a really good handle on the February numbers and the different ways to look at them. But you mentioned earlier, these are quick estimates. They get revised.
They do. It's standard practice. As more complete data flows in from all the sources, the numbers get updated. So the report mentions that the figures for January 2025 have now had their first revision.
So that 5.0% we mentioned for January might be slightly different now.
Could be, yes. And the data for November 2024 has now been finalized after its revisions. It's a dynamic process.
Right, the picture becomes clearer over time. It's not just a one-and-done number.
Exactly. And just to give a sense of how much data they do get initially, the report provides weighted response rates.
How many factories and units actually reported on time for this estimate?
Pretty much. For February, the response rate was a solid 89%. For January, it was even higher at 94%. And for the final November figures, 95%.
Those seem like pretty high numbers. Suggests the initial estimates are based on good coverage.
Yes, it gives us a good level of confidence in the underlying data collection, even for the quick estimates.
That's good to know. And for listeners tracking this, when's the next piece of the puzzle? The data for March.
The report says the index for March 2025 is scheduled for release on Monday, April 28th, 2025.
Okay, April 28th, so not too long to wait for the next update.
Just a few weeks.
All right, so let's try and wrap this up. Pulling it all together from our deep dive into the February 2025 IIP report, we saw moderate overall industrial growth, 2.9%.
A slight slowdown from January's pace.
Right, but within that, some real pockets of strength, especially in manufacturing sectors like basic metals and motor vehicles.
And looking at it from the use-based side, the real standouts were the growth in capital goods, that investment signal.
Yeah, 8.2%.
And infrastructure construction goods up 6.6%.
Showing continued building activity.
But contrasted by that dip, that contraction
Yeah.
in consumer non-durables.
Down 2.1%, which definitely raises some questions.
It does.
So a final thought maybe. Considering this quite strong growth in capital goods and infrastructure, how might these trends really shape India's industrial future in the next few months?
And perhaps what factors might be influencing both that slight overall moderation from January and that specific weakness we saw in consumer non-durables.
Yeah, lots to mull over there. What's driving investment versus everyday spending?
Indeed. And of course, for anyone who really wants to get into the weeds,
The nitty-gritty details.
with a full press release, all the data tables, the methodologies, it's all available on the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation website.
That's www.mospi.gov.in.
Exactly. Plenty there for the data enthusiasts.